into another episode in the MentorEd series, a video log that Alliance Tutoring provides to you. And I'm Ken Hinker. I've been speaking recently and writing recently about a number of features of American secondary and higher education that I find discomforting. I've provided a series of attitudes or ideas, perhaps methods, that would allow us to push back against a few of the shibboleths and a few of the taken for granted features about where we are in our educational life that some of us would find off-putting. And so I've been thinking a little bit about the Gadfly, about the importance of the educational Gadfly. And I thought maybe it was appropriate now to pause for a second and to describe some of the impressions as well as some of the motivations that I see, some of the virtues that I see in Gadflyism. I'm not sure that's a word, but I just coined it now. And so a Gadfly is a bug that harries, that bites livestock. We've taken this in a metaphorical way to describe an individual who, on a social, perhaps on a political, certainly on an educational scale, tries to upset groupthink, asks the difficult questions that point to absences or idiosyncrasies or perhaps even inaccuracies or illogic in the kind of programs and the sort of attitudes that the prevailing wisdom might put forward to our students. That could be in a college, that could be in a university, certainly could be in a high school or even in a middle school or younger. We've seen these kind of battles play out in pop culture over the last 5 to 7, maybe longer years. And we have watched as the right kinds of citizen actions take place, where parents and administrators, teachers and caregivers all take part in the process of deciding what makes sense to teach our students, to teach our kids, so that they can move forward and have happy, productive, fulfilling, and remunerative lives. And so, the first educational Gadfly, the one perhaps that shows up in most people's memory, is Socrates. Socrates of Athens. Perhaps you'll remember that he was an educator, but he thought of himself as an educator who was a disruptor. He was a kind of chaos agent. The Socratic method, of course, requires the give and take of questioning and response. It requires the uncovering of previously unknown truths, the maybe baseless ground for certain kinds of knowledge, the way that our actions are predicated upon things that we don't fully understand, or maybe that we have simply accepted without really pondering on their veracity. All of that I mean to say is, our kids go to school because we tell them to, and we teach and we parent in a way that looks an awful lot like it did when we were kids, when we went to school, when we had our parents telling us to do certain things. And it is maybe useful to point out that Gadflyism, the act of being an ombudsman, being a critic, being someone from the outside who attempts to make things better through constructive criticism, well, that ended up with Socrates being forced to drink hemlock poison. And I don't think that that's the way that things would go in this day and age. But it does mean that we might have to put ourselves in front of a very critical audience. And if you've seen the Jean-Louis David painting, Jacques-Louis David painting from 1787, you see a particularly noble image of Socrates, who is attempting to teach his followers right at the very last, just before he takes that drink of hemlock. It's a nice image. It's romantic with a capital R, because it portrays a sort of righteous resistance against implacable institutional might. And that all might sound highfalutin. Maybe it is. But I think it's also important for us to continually use that Gadflyism to ask for the best from our local high schools, from our school boards, from the parent body, from one another, from the PTO, even from the coaches and the tutors that we employ to help our kids become their best selves. So, to be a Gadfly is not to be a pain. It's not to simply be a thorn for the sake of being a thorn. In fact, it ought always to have the notion behind it that we can do ever better. And one of my favorite Gadflies is a man named Bill Dereshowitz, an author, a professor, who many years ago began to write in this Gadfly vein, and certainly captured my attention immediately, both with a couple of essays that he published online in a journal called The American Scholar, and then later on when he began publishing long-form books. And the most influential of those is one from 2014 that's called Excellent Sheep, and I urge you to take a look at it. It was the kind of thing that fellow teachers and some of my administrators, some of my bosses at schools where I worked, wanted to poo-poo, and that was because it gave hard truths and unsettled some of what used to be hard and fast rules about why we did what we did, and about how we chose to evaluate students, and about the values that we sought to inculcate in them in a mindful way, with partnership from parents. And so Dereshowitz was a Yale University professor. I believe he was educated at another Ivy League school, Columbia, I think, springs to mind. A really, really fascinating thinker, a teacher, and someone who could exhort with clarity those of us who were interested in pushing forward a new kind of palimpsest, maybe even a blueprint. His major essay was called Disadvantages of an Elite Education, as I say. But later on down the line, once he published Excellent Sheep, I tried to get him to come over to the boarding school where I worked, and things didn't work out necessarily just because of the particulars of our everyday lives. But what's most important to me is that his message resonated with teens, not with sort of institutional adults that I used to work with most often, but they resonated with teens. I had my kids read a number of his essays, and I had them read excerpts from his book, Excellent Sheep, and I thought maybe I would share with you one or two of those things. Perhaps it'll be instructive as we think a little bit more closely about what it means to be a Gadfly. This has to do with MentorEd, and you'll see immediately. This is from 177, page 177 of Excellent Sheep. He says, students retreat once they see that nothing better is on offer than simple grades, but what they really want is that their teachers challenge them and that they show that they care about them. They don't want fun and games, they want the real thing. What they want, in other words, is mentorship. I remember, this is Dereshowitz, I remember just how starved I was for that myself in college. I saw how starved my students were for validation, for connection, and, let's not be shy of saying it, for parental figures other than their parents. There's nothing wrong with that desire. It's a part of growing up. But we are in possession of our kids. We're jealous of other influences upon them. And Mark Edmondson, who, personal point here from Ken, was a professor at University of Virginia when I was there. I sought to take his class. Edmondson remarks, while acknowledging the inevitable sadness for the parents who are left behind, he says, quote, "It almost seems the natural order of things that children will leave their families and strive to put themselves under the influence of other guides, more attuned to their rising hopes." And this, of course, lays bare as well as gives new force to the importance that we've been talking about in this particular series, the importance of mentorship. And that could be with high school students, it could be with college students, like I've just been reading to you, and it could be in the professional realm as well. Some of the best teachers, whether or not those are from our own professional ranks or whether or not they are from schooling, Dereshowitz tells us, are those that, quote, teach about everything. He says that's what typifies the students who are asked, what's your favorite teacher? Those are the ones who move kids. It's the analogy for the way that we learn the world, because no teacher can really truly teach about everything, of course. But the best ones are those that have the capacity to connect the individual and the specific subject matter to its importance in the wider world. In fact, later on the same page, 180 from Excellent Sheep, Dereshowitz quotes a student and he says, "A student put it to me this way about a professor in an oceanic studies program. Quote, he made marine ecology reflect universal truths." End quote. He says, you know great teaching the moment you encounter it. You feel it, that this is what you came for. This is what reaches deep inside you. And it satisfies a desire that you didn't know you had. It makes the world feel newly large and meaningful, just like art. And the other thing that students say about their favorite teachers is that he changed my life. And so, occasionally I've had a parent or two say something similar from one of the students that I have mentored or that I have taught. It's a great gift, and I know you too have had that same sort of interaction. And with humility, I would simply say that, no, I just saw one thing reflected in another. And I just saw human achievement and human endeavor mirrored back from one place to another. You don't teach a student without analogy. You tell them a new thing in terms of one that they already understand. And when mentors and teachers do this, then we're going to upset the apple cart just a little bit, because we're going to give new ways to see the old things. And perhaps that too is what one of the fundamentals of education might be, and one of the fundamentals of mentorship might be. So I will leave you from here to dig into the particulars with your kids, dig into the particulars with your students, and always keep an eye towards those larger universal truths, the ones that enhance a student's worldview and that help them find themselves in the tapestry of all that we know and all that can be known in the future. I'll see you next time.